let's talk about all of those elections after the era of good feelings, after all of the disintegration of the Federalists, and suddenly now we only got one party and everybody loves everybody else, right? Okay, so the presidential election of 1824, which is after Monroe's second term. So Monroe has been president and everybody's a Democratic Republican, but there are factions of Democratic Republicans. So I'm going to talk about the four candidates of 1824. Okay, starting from the left, excuse me. Henry Clay, who is that kingmaker we talked about the other day. Okay, he was the one that often rallied the support of the party behind a specific candidate. He's actually nominated for the presidency in 1824. Henry Clay was born in Virginia to a Baptist minister. His widowed mother remarried a rich planter after his Baptist minister father died. So he is part of that Virginia aristocratic class. He is one of those Virginians. Now, he is a Democratic Republican, just like Thomas Jefferson was, just like Monroe was, and Madison. He is one of those. He's like the closest thing to a real one of those that they have. He studied law under the people that had worked with Jefferson on the Declaration. So he's brought up in that Virginia legacy of shaping the country, and we're all founding fathers and all of that kind of stuff. He became a lawyer when he was in Kentucky, and he went into politics in Kentucky. So he became part of the political system of Kentucky and then part of the political system of Washington. He is pro-French and anti-British, like any good Democratic Republican. He really wants America to forge relationship with France, not with Britain. He helped institute the American system, which we talked about before, which was based on Hamilton's Federalist system, but it was designed by him, so it's not a Federalist thing. And he was the Speaker of the House when Monroe was president. So he had the Speaker of the House in a House that was overwhelmingly dominated by his party. Y'all don't understand what the Speaker of the House is? Do you understand what that is? Okay, so when the House of Representatives is broken into two parties, you have the members of one party pick their favorite person, and that person is the Speaker of the House. Does anybody know who the Speaker of the House is right now?
Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi, that's right. Nancy Pelosi was elected by the other party who have the majority in the House to be the Speaker of the House. So this is a person that wields an immense amount of power. Okay, on the other side, the other person in the House is the minority whip. That's the person who is the minority leader. In the Senate, it's the majority leader and the minority leader of the Senate. So that's what his whole experience. So he's been serving as one of the most powerful people in Washington by the time 1824 comes along. But the problem that Henry Clay has is he's not Virginian enough for the Virginians, and he's not Kentuckian enough for the Kentuckians. He walks the middle of the road too much. He's too, people can't decide whether or not they like him. Okay, William Crawford is a splinter representative. He was a lawyer in Georgia who became a Georgia representative, and he was James Madison's Secretary of War. And in 1823, he had a stroke. So he's running for the office in 1824, but nobody expects him to win. He's like a nothing candidate. He basically gets a very small percentage of the votes. He's nominated by a splinter group who wants somebody from that Southern aristocracy but doesn't like Henry Clay very much. Okay, that's why he's nominated. John Quincy Adams is the son of John Adams. So John Quincy Adams is aristocracy on the other side. He's Massachusetts Bay royalty. He is part of that class of Massachusetts Bay that is all the things. He's highly educated. He went to lots of schools. He graduated from Harvard. And while his father was in office—
I never realized that was his son.
While his father was in office, he served on diplomatic missions. He traveled to Britain and France and Italy. He met all of those Enlightenment thinkers that were in those salons in France. He lived in England for a little while, and he married a woman from London. So he loves Britain. He is like, let's forge a relationship with Britain that will allow us to be like brother countries. Let's go ahead and reforge that relationship since they're not going to come back and try to colonize us again. Let's build our trade relationship with Britain. His family has never owned slaves. Now, John Adams never owned slaves. He wasn't an abolitionist, but he never owned slaves, and he didn't like the institution of slavery. After the Missouri Compromise, John Quincy Adams becomes more abolitionist than ever. He hates the idea of new states coming in that are slave states. So he's a lawyer in Boston, and while his father was in office, he was appointed as the ambassador to Prussia. So John Quincy Adams has been in politics basically since he was literally a kid. He has been in politics since he was an able teenager. And as Secretary of State under Monroe, he's already taken, Secretary of State is arguably one of the most powerful positions in the White House. While the president does a lot, the vice president does a lot, the Secretary of State is responsible for almost all foreign interaction. So the as Secretary of State, he ordered, do I have that here? Oh, I've got all of this stuff on slides. I feel bad now. Okay, well, they're out of order, so.
You're getting ahead of yourself.
Apparently I had all this stuff all detailed on slides, so y'all will be able to get those off of Blackboard later. Okay, so we're on John Quincy Adams, I guess. Okay, so he negotiated the Adams-Onis Treaty, which was a treaty with Spain regarding Florida. Basically, Florida has a Native American problem. They have the Seminoles, which are scraps from a lot of other tribes that have all moved into Florida to flee from conflict. And now they're forming one big kind of, monster tribe in Florida, and that's causing problems for the Spanish. So John Quincy Adams sends General Andrew Jackson into Florida to deal with the Seminole problem. And the Spanish are so intimidated by how well that goes down that it makes it possible for him to negotiate a treaty with the Spanish. So that's his history under the Secretary of State. And then we've got Andrew Jackson. Okay, Andrew Jackson, who was a general, who is a war hero, has kind of a long, complicated history. First of all, he absolutely hates the British. And to give you an idea of why, he was born in the Carolinas. So he was born in that sort of behind the fall line area of the Carolinas in the Waxhaws. His father died in a logging accident just a couple of weeks before he was born. So he grew up without his father. In 1780, so we're talking about during the Revolutionary War, in 1780, redcoats came into his town and massacred American troops who were trying to surrender in the Waxhaws, including one of his older brothers. He and his other older brother joined the revolutionary cause as couriers. So he was a little boy who was running messengers, not a little boy, like a pre-teenager, who was running messages back and forth. When he and his brother were captured and imprisoned, they were starved and beaten, and they caught smallpox while in the British, while imprisoned by the British. His mother came and negotiated for their release, and they did let them go, but then they had to walk 40 miles to American safety while suffering from smallpox. So that 40 miles cost his brother his life. So his brother died. And then his mother got work nursing US prisoners of war on a British ship and died of cholera. So Andrew Jackson has grown up absolutely hating the British. He absolutely hates them. He blames them for the death of his mother and his brother and his brothers. And whatever else happens, he is not going to be happy about a treaty with the British. So he, unlike the elite Henry Clay and the John Quincy Adams and his family, he never went to school, really. He worked odd jobs. Yes?
He's the people's man.
Oh, yeah. No, he is one of the people. He worked odd jobs. He was a saddle maker for a little while. He was fairly well, he educated himself, so he was able to be a teacher for a while. And eventually he just earned his way to being allowed to take the bar and pass it. So he became a lawyer without ever actually studying or studying law in an institution. He studied law on his own and was able to pass the bar. He just basically earned his way. He wants to be among the elite. He wants to be one of those landed aristocratic Southern planters. So he begins to build up his law practice, and as his law practice starts to pay off, he starts buying land. As his land starts to work, he begins to buy slaves for his land. He bought his first slave in 1788, and he worked with his holdings, his land holdings, with 9 slaves. By the end of his life, He would own over 300 slaves, at least during one period, 150 of them all at once. So he was building up a slave plantation. He helped to found the city of Memphis. He helped to build the city of Memphis and establish it. And then he took a role as an officer in the Tennessee militia, specifically because he knew it would give him that much more prestige and position. And over time, he would just become one of those aristocrats. He'd become one of those guys who everybody expected to go into office. But he made a couple of mistakes along the way. He married a woman who might not have been completely divorced. He married, this woman was married to an abusive captain, and she had separated from him, and witnesses saw them make promises to each other before she was technically divorced from her captain. He remarried her after she was legally free from her husband, but by then she'd already been calling herself Mrs. Jackson for quite some time. Mrs. Jackson, yeah, that's a Panic song, isn't it? Yeah, anyway. So she'd already been calling herself Mrs. Jackson for a while. Somebody tried to besmirch her name, and he challenged them to a duel, and he was shot in the chest and survived. So he felt very strongly about his wife, obviously. During the War of 1812, he took the Tennessee militia and he led them. He thought that during this opportunity would be a great time to throw the Spanish out of Florida and Texas. And he found an ally, somebody else who thought the same thing, and that man was Aaron Burr, who thought it would be a great idea to throw the Spanish out of Florida and Texas. And he joined forces with Aaron Burr for that purpose, to start to negotiate and figure out how to move the Spanish out of Texas so that Americans could take it over. And then he found out what Aaron Burr was actually planning to do was to establish a separate country out of those holdings and make himself leader of those countries. And so Andrew Jackson turned him into the president. He turned him into, he reported him to Jefferson, who charged Burr and his friends with treason. So he didn't actually end up participating in that. He, during the War of 1812, he also fought, that's out of order because that would have happened in like 1808. But during the War of 1812, he also fought against the Red Sticks. I don't know if y'all remember, but those were the native Creek who had opted to not support the Americans and to fight against them. He led a force against Tecumseh, and then he marched a force all the way down to New Orleans, where he had that epic battle with the British that took less than 30 minutes for them to finish slogging through their broken down tunnel and end up on the battlefield against him and his coalition of forces. So that was all, that's all of the things that Andrew Jackson brings to the table. He is very pro-slavery, absolutely hates the British. He is a champion of the common man because he's brought himself up from nothing, and he is a celebrated war hero. The election of 1824, therefore, is one of the most divisive in the country. You need a minimum number of votes in order to achieve a majority. You have to have over half the votes. When that doesn't happen, the House of Representatives gets to vote on who's going to be the president. I don't know if y'all know this, but if you don't manage to achieve over half the votes, you can't get elected. So there are 4 candidates, and they split the votes. Jackson has the majority. It's not, I mean, in the popular vote, it's a greater majority than in the electoral vote, but you can see John Quincy Adams only gets 31% of the vote, and Andrew Jackson gets 43%. In the electoral vote, it's 38 to 32. So there's no doubt that Jackson has the majority, okay? Because he got the least number of votes, Henry Clay is disqualified. So it goes to the House of Representatives with these 3 candidates, Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and William Crawford. And Henry Clay, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, is not allowed to be one of the candidates because he got the least number of votes. So he leads the election in the House of Representatives. Even though he just lost, he is now the most powerful person who gets to choose who the president's going to be. He makes a deal with John Quincy Adams. Now, some people think it will call this a corrupt bargain. Jackson definitely did. But Henry Clay claimed over and over again that, no, this is just how the representatives voted. This is how the House of Representatives voted. But the House of Representatives votes John Quincy Adams to win the election. Okay? And then John Quincy Adams appoints Henry Clay as his Secretary of State. Not at all suspicious, but a lot of people grab onto this and say, this seems like this was kind of rigged because Jackson so the only way for Jackson to have lost his majority of votes is if every single person who voted for Clay decided to vote for John Quincy Adams once Clay was no longer available, which is what John Quincy Adams claimed happened. That's what Henry Clay claimed happened. All of my supporters went to John Quincy Adams, so he won. So after the election of 1824, that's the election in the House, the election of 1825, and it's William Crawford still only has this tiny little piece of the vote. Jackson has lost votes, apparently, and all of the rest of the votes that are left over go to John Quincy Adams. Now, there's no doubt that Henry Clay campaigned for John Quincy Adams, that he went in and campaigned against Andrew Jackson anyway. Maybe not for John Quincy Adams, but definitely against Jackson. That he got all of his supporters in the House of Representatives to vote the way he wanted to. Either way, John Quincy Adams becomes president. John Quincy Adams has a rocky president. He wants an even bigger, better American system. So he wants more tariffs. He wants more subsidies. He wants the federal government to be more involved in the economy. He wants to protect the textile industry with a bigger tariff than they had before, which pisses off the South. And the South doesn't feel like he has the right to do this for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is he's not a slave-owning plantation person, so he doesn't have the right to start telling people how to run their businesses, and also that they're pretty sure that this is just a way for him to kill slavery. So unlike when Jefferson imposed the tariff, and they were kind of like, but he's one of us, so I guess we'll see if this helps and we'll see if this works. They're like, no, absolutely not. No support. He wants to assimilate the Native Americans into the country. He wants to make them citizens. Which there's actually quite a lot of people in the government who do at the time. They want to make them citizens, but there are also a lot of people who recognize that they might not like that very much. All of his trade deals and his treaties are focused on the British, which Southerners like Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson are not happy about. They're anti-British, pro-French. But John Quincy Adams lived in England. He married a Londoner. He's got this great relationship with England, and he wants to see it grow. Also, weird side note, he might have had a pet alligator. You can look that up. That's one of those things.
That should have cinched it right there.
There is anecdotal evidence that he had a pet alligator, but if you look it up, there's also people saying that's not true. So I think it should be true, so I'm going to go with it's true, because I just like it. I like the idea that he had a pet alligator. He was really not very popular as a president. He really had trouble getting people to follow him. He didn't have the charisma of his father, and his father didn't have that much charisma either, but he didn't have what it took to put all of these forces together and make them work together. He just wasn't good at it. So the election for 1828, yes.
Were there any other presidents who were kind of like how Quincy was the son of John? Were there any other presidents like that?
No, but there are a lot of presidents that are related to each other.
But no, like, son of
No direct father and sons.
What about George Bush?
Oh my gosh, you're right. I'm thinking like the part of history I teach, which is
What
like,
was the question?
I'm sorry, you're right, the Bushes. Yes, George and HW and W.
Oh, you mean like familial ties and stuff?
Yeah, you're right. But is that it though? That's it though.
Yeah, there wasn't very much of, I think they might have been home too.
Yeah, there's a lot of family connections among the presidents, but
FDR related to Teddy?
yeah, they're related, but they're like third cousins. So in multiple ways too, because Franklin married his first cousin, who was also Teddy Roosevelt's niece.
I wanted to say something.
Yes.
So actually, I'm kind of related to John Quincy Adams.
Are you?
Yeah, I actually wanted to look it up myself because I learned that when I was like in 7th grade, and I guess that's a cool thing. I didn't know.
I mean, it's always interesting to find out that you've got relatives up there that you
Yeah.
can just walk that far.
Hey, you could run for president and say you were related to Adams now.
Well, Well, you could run for president anyway. You don't have to be related to anybody.
Well, that's true, but it'd be a fun little antidote.
Well, then you should find out whether or not he had a pet alligator, because you need to know if that's part of your family. So the election for
Tell your mom you need a pet alligator.
The election for 1828, the campaign for that election started in 1825. As soon as they elected John Quincy Adams into office, Jackson started campaigning for president in 1825. That was unusual at the time. It kind of happens more now. People announce that they're running for president right after the new president is chosen. So that's happened more and more lately. But it's a campaign of negative campaigning. From 1825 on, it's Jackson versus Adams. It's Jackson versus John Quincy Adams. The accusations that Jacksonian supporters make is Adams is in love with the British. Okay, he's absolutely in love with the British. If it were up to him, he'd hand this whole country back to them. That's how badly he wants us to be connected with Britain again. It's not safe for him to be in office because he's so in love with the British. The second thing is, were accusations that his diplomatic career was full of shady dealings. Like, for instance, they began to spread the rumor that when he was negotiating the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, he got Tsar Alexander I a prostitute so that he would tell England to back off. I'm like, did it work? I mean, why is this a bad thing? But there's no evidence.
What about a prostitute?
When John Quincy Adams was helping to negotiate the Treaty of Ghent, and I don't know if you remember this, but basically the reason why there was a treaty at the War of 1812 in 1814 is because Tsar Alexander told the British they needed to back off. So the accusation is the reason that the Tsar did that is because Adams bribed him with a prostitute.
Okay.
Okay. Good. I'm glad we covered that. All of Adams's presidency is based on nepotism. He wouldn't have got this job if it weren't for his daddy. And by the way, probably his uncles and all kinds of other people he's related to. That includes his jobs as a diplomat, as an ambassador, as a Secretary of State under Monroe, as all of these things. The only reason he got them is because who he's related to. It's not because he himself has any talent or gifts to offer. But the scariest thing that Jackson said about Adams was that he is an abolitionist who would free all the slaves if he could, which should scare all the southern states to death. And they do not want this man to stay in office. So from 1825 on, Jackson's campaign is already claiming all these things and launching this huge negative campaign. The National Republicans, which is John Quincy Adams's party, actually hits back. They publish what are called the Coffin Handbills. And the Coffin Handbills are a pamphlet, some account of some of the bloody deeds of General Jackson. And they begin to distribute the Coffin Handbills all over the place. Some of the things the Coffin Handbills say, Jackson is not just a slave owner, but a slave trader, which means that he doesn't just own slaves, but he also smuggles them in, which, as we all know, has been made illegal. And therefore, he's participating in the illegal slave trade. And that part might have actually been true. It's kind of true. He ordered the execution of 6 deserters in New Orleans. So when he took over New Orleans, after the British had that thing happen, when Jackson was basically, militarily guarding New Orleans, he imposed martial law. And during that time, he executed 6 deserters and whipped several more. So his martial law was very strict and very severe. So that part's probably true. There was an accusation in the Coffin Handbills that Jackson and his men, when they were fighting with the Shawnee during the Tecumseh Uprising, that they actually ate the men that they had killed. No evidence whatsoever about that, one way or the other. So if it's true, you gotta ask how on earth anybody ever found out about it. And then there was a lot in there about his wife. His wife was a bigamist, which she was. She married Jackson before she was divorced. But that before she was married to him, she was a prostitute. She was a lady of ill repute. All of these kind of things are in it. So Jackson starts hitting John Quincy Adams with the things about him that are dangerous but true, like the fact that he is very pro-British, like the fact that he's a very strong abolitionist, like the fact that he got his job because of who his father was. John Quincy Adams turns around and hits back with things that are kind of outrageous and only might be true. But back and forth, this massive negative campaign. The biggest accusation against Jackson was that he was uneducated, unpolished, and unfit for office. He was just not the product of these great educational systems the way that John Quincy Adams was. For some reason, in the election of 1828, John Quincy Adams lost by a lot. So this is the result of all of that negative campaigning, is that in 1828, Andrew Jackson won with 68% of the electoral vote. So a nice, solid, easy majority. And John Quincy Adams lost. Yes?
Were there any other parties that even bothered?
No.
Just the two?
Just the two of them. Just the two of them. And they were technically both, they had by now given names to those fractures. They were not Democratic Republicans anymore. They were Jacksonian Democrats and National Republicans. So now we have the Democrats and the Republicans. Okay, we had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Then the Federalists died off and moved into the Democratic Republicans. Now we have the Jacksonian Democrats and the National Republicans. Okay, so Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. So,
Not even 50 years after they already had Republicans and Democrats.
and over the course of American history, what those parties stand for changes drastically over and over and over again. A Jacksonian Democrat begins as the party that stands for maintaining the aristocratic slave culture of the South. Those are that's what the Democratic Party stands for, okay? And then there's this depression, you see, and a Democratic candidate takes some massive Federalist action in order to pull America out of the depression, and suddenly the Democrats are split between Jacksonian Democrats and FDR Democrats, and then the whole party shifts in the 1970s. So the Republicans start to stand for, so all this time the Republicans stand for the abolitionists, the people who are fighting for equal rights for freedmen and all of those things. That's what John Quincy Adams stood for. So that's who the National Republicans stand for up until like after the Civil War. And then they start to get all mishmashed again. So the Democrat and Republican parties, they don't change their names. They just change what they stand for. So anyway, here's a sneak peek of some of the things that Adams is going to be facing during his presidency. We're going to talk about Adams. I meant Jackson is going to be facing during his presidency. Jackson he's enough of a problematic president that it's going to take us kind of like Jefferson, it's going to take us a couple of lectures to take care of some of the stuff that he was in charge of. But I just want to give you a sneak peek of some of the reasons why his presidency was so difficult by talking about the Petticoat Affair. Just by looking at this picture, what would you guess the Petticoat Affair is about?
Women or women's dresses or women's rights.
Okay. All right. This is the first big scandal crisis that Jackson has to deal with when he becomes president. It's called the Petticoat Affair. Anybody want to take a guess?
What, did he chase petticoats?
It's a good question. But he loved his wife so much. Why would he do that? No, the Petticoat Affair is when he became president, one of the first things he did was the same thing every president does. He appointed a cabinet. And he appointed a cabinet out of men that he had served with and men that he respected and men that he trusted. But this is not a part of the elite upper circle here. The men that he trusts and the men that he respects are not part of the elite. So he builds his cabinet out of people that he has worked with, men that he has worked with, who might not have come from those upper crust elite societies. They might not have come from the cream of the crop in Virginia. They were probably soldiers that he fought with and who earned his respect that way. So as a result, he appoints as his Secretary of War a man named Eaton. And this man is married to a woman who used to be a barmaid. She used to be a barmaid.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is scandalous, but he would have had no idea why it was scandalous. He didn't appoint her, he appointed her husband. Unfortunately, what this means is that the other cabinet members' wives don't feel like they can associate with her because she's so much below them, because she was a barmaid, that it would be inappropriate for them to have social functions that she was at. And Jackson doesn't think that's a problem because, again, his cabinet is the men, not the women. But then the women begin to put pressure on their husbands not to attend social functions with her husband. So now this means that it is considered shameful for members of the cabinet to meet with Eaton, who's a member of the cabinet. Okay, so in order to, Jackson had no idea that this was going to be a problem because he is not used to moving in that part of the government. He has been involved in politics on a local level, on a state level, and he's been in the military, but he's never had to deal with this crap. The White House, the elite society of Washington. He's never had to deal with this before. So as a result, after he has appointed his whole cabinet and after this scandal breaks, his whole cabinet has to resign so that he can reappoint them according to guidance that's provided to him by the elite, so that he can reappoint men whose families are appropriate so that this doesn't happen again. So he ends up with a cabinet that makes everybody happy, but he doesn't actually like any of them, so he doesn't take advice from his cabinet anymore. So Jackson is one of the first presidents who has a cabinet he can't work with. So that's the beginning of Andrew Jackson's problematic presidency. And that is pretty much all the energy I have.